What's going on, everybody? It's etaprime back here again. Today we're going to be taking a first look at the all-new Retroid Pocket Mini. This is one that a lot of people have been excited about, mainly because of the CPU and the screen they opted to use with this new handheld device. Basically, what we've got here is an AMOLED display paired up with the Snapdragon CPU, making for a pretty potent combination when it comes down to it. And obviously, Mini's in the name, so this is definitely a pretty small handheld when you compare it to their upcoming Retroid Pocket 5. Hopefully I can get my hands on that one soon so we can do a comparison here, but this is basically a first look video. I definitely want to spend some more time with this before I do a full review on it. At the time of making this video, I've had this in my possession for about 24 hours. Retroid is offering a bunch of different color variants when it comes to their new Pocket Mini. They've got an SFC, black, orange, 16-bit, and the one I have here is the Saturn. So we've got the Saturn button color scheme and kind of the maroon triggers and shoulder buttons. Personally, I do think it's a pretty good looking device, and originally when I first saw images or the video they posted of this, I actually didn't think it would be this sleek. I thought it was just a bit chunkier. It's actually a pretty nice looking little device. The Pocket Mini does have analog triggers, and these front face buttons actually feel pretty decent. They're definitely a bit smaller than some other handhelds, but we are working with a small form factor unit. When it comes to the D-pad itself, this is very reminiscent of the PS Vita D-pad. It is using dome switches, and we'll get into some testing in a bit, but I'm kind of digging the role this one has. And even though the body on this is really small, I think they did a pretty decent job with ergonomics. Now, I will tell you, if you've got really large hands, then you're going to dwarf this thing. But for most people out there, holding this thing won't be an issue, and you can get to all of the buttons really easily. This is actively cooled, so we've got a built-in fan, intake vent on the rear, exhaust vent up top here. We've also got our power button and volume rocker. And moving down to the bottom, micro SD card slot, 3.5mm audio jack, and USB Type-C. This does support video over USB Type-C, 1080p, 60 Hz. And of course, when it comes to the overall specs here, Retroid opted to use the Snapdragon 865, and I'm glad to see a Snapdragon chip here because we've got really great compatibility with native Android games and especially emulators. We also have active cooling, but the 865 is getting a bit dated. It was launched in March 2020, so it's almost 5 years old now, and since then, we've had some really powerful Snapdragon chips hit the market. But when it comes to handheld devices, I think it's going to handle a lot of stuff that we want to throw at it. The GPU is the Adreno 650. We've got 6GB of LPDDR4X RAM, 128GB of UFS 3.1 storage, plus we've got that micro SD card slot, a 3.7-inch AMOLED display with a resolution of 1280 by 960. It'll do up to 500 nits of brightness. It does have Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.1. 4,000 mAh battery with 27-watt quick charging capabilities. The Pocket Mini weighs only 215 grams, and the operating system here is Android, but it's definitely an older version, coming in with Android 10 out of the box, and I'm not sure if they plan to update this to a later version or not. Obviously, we do have some RGB around the analog sticks here. Each side has its own control set, and brightness can be changed by dragging down on the graph, bringing it to the darker setting, but I kind of wish we had a real brightness slider. Who knows, it could be added in a later update. Like I mentioned, the Pocket Mini does support video over USB Type-C, 1080 60 FPS, which is more than enough for a little handheld like this. It also supports mouse, so I've got a mouse plugged into the dock that I'm using here. Figured I'd just use my game capture to make it a bit easier to see everything, and it does look pretty decent on a larger display. First things first, wanted to get into the software here. Swiping down from the top, we've got our quick access menu, and from here, we've got some Retroid specific settings. First one we have here is performance mode. So we've actually got a standard, performance, and high performance. I've just been running in high performance. Basically, it's just going to change the governor for us. Over here, fan control, sport, smart, customize, and I'll tell you, at 100%, this thing can get a bit loud for, how small it is. I usually keep it in smart mode. Joystick lighting, we took a look at this. Again, I just cannot figure out how to change the brightness. Not sure if I'm missing something here or not, but it's fully controllable left and right individually. We can change our controller style right here. So if you wanted to go retro style, totally disable it. And we've got the Xbox layout, L2, R2 mode, analog, digital, or we can set it up for both. I'm usually in analog because, playing racing games, I like having that control over that gas and brake. Floating icon, force landscape, and really that's about it for the quick settings here. But there's more to this, because if we head into our settings, move down, we've got our handheld settings. Power saving mode, we can set up a background process limit, connect to TV, turn the handheld's console screen completely off, and I've got mine on right now. No auto sleep, so it's not going to sleep while it's plugged in, and of course, force landscape. USB, status bar, input control. Got our gamepad test right here. And so far, this has actually been working pretty decently with these analog sticks, and especially this D-pad. So it's very reminiscent of something on the PS Vita. It's using dome switches, but it's pretty accurate here. Calibrate that joystick, set the dead zones. I mean, there's just a lot that we can mess around with in here, and it's even got a virtual mouse mode. So once this is enabled, we have to set up a hotkey. So I'm going to hold down 2 keys, and I can enable this and disable it at any time. That way, when I enable it, I can actually use my right analog stick to control the mouse cursor. Google Services, Advanced, play boot music, we can disable certain apps, and so on and so on. So yeah, I mean, as for, handheld settings specific for something like this, we do have quite a few that we can customize. And of course, I mean, we're running Android, it's Android 10, but we also have the Retroid launcher built in. And on the initial setup with the device, you can have it either enter the Retroid launcher when you boot it up or go directly to Android. And it looks a little something like this, and we've seen this before on other Retroid devices. You can set this up pretty easily. It'll scan your directories, download artwork for you. But they do have something new coming, and I'm not sure if it's going to be in the next firmware update or not. I'm actually really excited to see what they've got in the works. And of course, if you don't want to use this, you can always download a different front end, Launchbox, Dig. Got tons of them over on Google Play. Now it's time to get into a little bit of game testing, and we're going to start off here with some native Android games. Got Minecraft running here, and just like the other Retroid Pocket devices, we do have some gaming-centric features that we can add here. On-screen FPS counter. We can also map the built-in controller to touch points on the screen and use it with games that don't natively support controllers on Android, like Genshin Impact. Speaking of that game, I did want to test this. Right now, I'm at medium 60 FPS. It's been running just fine like it is. And that built-in on-screen key mapper does come in really handy for games like this. And also, I mean, if you just wanted to kind of map your own controls, you could definitely use it with basically any game that supports touch. Now, a lot of the native Android games are going to work right out of the box with the built-in controller, but this is one they just haven't given us any love with. But it looks like the Snapdragon 865 paired up with that lower resolution display when you compare it to newer displays in the market in mobile devices is doing really well here with the harder to run Android games. But of course, a majority of people who pick these up want to emulate games, and I did want to test out this D-pad with some Dreamcast. We've got Marvel vs. Capcom 2 here using the Redream emulator. I'm upscaled to 1280 by 960, so we're matching that display. It does look really good on this AMOLED. I do like the roll on this D-pad, and I've never really been a big fan of the dome switches, but this one seems to work pretty good. If I can get this uppercut. There we go. So yeah, this is the first time I'm testing it out, and it's really not that bad. I could definitely get used to it. And with these Retroid devices, I've said it before with their other ones, kind of wish the D-pad was just a bit larger on it. But what they've got here does work with the smaller form factor. So far, for fighting games, this D-pad isn't bad at all. We'll have more testing coming up in my full review video, so keep an eye on the channel. And this Snapdragon 865 is going to emulate the lower end stuff just fine. I want to take it up a notch to GameCube, PSP, and PS2. So here we have the Dolphin emulator, and this is the official Dolphin emulator. Auto Modalista, we're at 1x using the OpenGL backend. With these Snapdragon chips, you really want to use OpenGL with most games. Got an Xbox controller connected over Bluetooth just to keep this thing stationary, but it is running this game at 60 FPS. I went through, tested a couple more games, and so far with the official Dolphin emulator, I'm seeing some pretty good GameCube and Wii emulation on this thing. I also tested out some PSP emulation. We've got Ghost of Sparta using the PPSSPP emulator. Vulkan backend, 3x running at 60 FPS with this, and of course this is one of the harder to emulate games. There was one little spot here where it had a dip, but other than that, I mean, it was at 60, 3x, and I think 2x still looks great on this display. And finally, I tested out some PS2 emulation using Nether SX2. 1x resolution, OpenGL backend, Gran Turismo 4 running great. So I'm sure we will run into some issues with some harder to emulate games. You may have to drop it down to 0.75x, but luckily we have that option. And I haven't even gone through tested out Vulkan because what I've tested here, OpenGL just worked great out of the box. The last thing I wanted to talk about here were some benchmarks that I ran on the Retroid Pocket Mini, and I kind of wanted to face this off against the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. The Gen 1 is a newer chip than the 865, and we've seen a bunch of devices come and go with that chip. And to tell you the truth, the way they've got the 865 set up here with that active cooling, it's not that far off from the Gen 1. I was pretty impressed by the benchmarks. But when moving over to something like Wildlife Extreme, you can see the Retroid Pocket Mini, 1,337. The 8 Gen 1 coming in with a 2,207. And finally, we've got Antutu, Retroid Pocket Mini, 773,000. While that Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 comes in over 1 million on the score. But take a look down the list. The GPU score on that 8 Gen 1 is really beating out the 865 here. We knew it would. I mean, it's definitely an older chip, but for what they've got here, it does work well for older emulation and even native Android games. So far, been having a pretty good time with the Retroid Pocket Mini. I've been more excited about the Retroid Pocket 5 coming in with a much larger display, but there were a lot of people out there that wanted to see this Mini. And yeah, it's a really portable device with a beautiful display. This was just my first look. I do want to get some more time in with this. Again, at the time of this video going live, I've only had about 24 hours with this thing. My full review is going to be up in the next few days, and we're going to face this off against the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro. If there's anything else you want to see in that video, just let me know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning a little more about the Retroid Pocket Mini, I'll leave some links down below. But that's it for this one. Like always, thanks for watching.